Good morning, students. Good morning, staff. This is the assembly to talk about obviously what's happening in Ukraine as part of our Ukraine Solidarity and Awareness Day that's happening today on Wednesday, the 9th of March. Warning ahead of time that obviously if there's concerns you have watching this assembly, please do let your teacher know. And you'll be allowed to step out of the room. But obviously, clearly, it's important that we talk about what's happening in Ukraine clearly and sensibly, but also in a way that allows us to discuss the atrocities which are happening there, and more importantly, to put that support in place for you as students to help you understand what's going on, but also to support you, because I'm understanding that students quite rightly would be concerned and upset about what is happening over in Ukraine. Before we get into Ukraine, it's important for us to understand that actually world conflicts are occurring the entire time. And sometimes there's a danger in the world that those conflicts that might not be on our front pages, that might not be in our news, there's a real concern that we might think that they're not actually happening or they've actually finished. And never that's more so prevalent than the work that we undertook and continue to support through the Gaza conflict. And students in year 11 and 13 and year 10 will fully remember in the summer the work that went on by the students at ABA in support of raising over £1,200, which is the largest amount of money we've ever raised for a charity, but here supported when we had the violence that was occurring in Gaza. And many of our students still have family and friends in that area, and as we know from that environment and that conflict, even though it's not on the front pages and even though it's not on the news, it is still going on. And in actual fact, most recently there's real concern that it's going to go backwards and we're going to see that massive escalation in that violence again. So what I wanted to reassure students, and there's been quite a bit on the press around the role of the Palestinian flag versus the Ukraine flag, and why is it okay that one has had the Ukraine flag showing, yet the Palestinian flag was looked at as not being able to be used. And that's a right question to ask around the role of Free Gaza and the Palestinian liberation versus Ukraine. But actually it's also really important to understand that these conflicts are both equally as important to look at, and that's something you're going to be discussing as part of the work that you're doing in your LRG. And we continue as a school to remain committed to supporting not only the Gaza campaign but also the wider conflicts across the world. But for now, it's really important that we do focus as a school and as a student body on what's happening in Ukraine. And hopefully coming out of this assembly, you'll clearly see why I think we have got the capacity. I think we've got the money, and I think we've got the inclination from students and staff to say this is not acceptable. And as a world, we're saying that this is not acceptable. And what can we do about it as a school? So we've got a situation, and we had a situation 2 weeks ago where we had a build-up of Russian troops around the outside of Ukraine. We had a build-up of troops in Crimea, an area that was annexed, i.e. that means already pre-invaded by Russia back in 2014, and talk about the fact that we're going to have this situation in Ukraine being controlled by Russia. And this map on the right demonstrates already that was by the 1st of March, so 8 days ago, halfway through where we are at the moment in the invasion, already the fact that Russia moved into those environments. So why do we think that's happening? It's a very difficult question, and many far more intelligent people than I am are questioning why Vladimir Putin, who is the president of Russia, has made those decisions. And some of those conversations and thoughts are around the role of the former Soviet Union, clearly something that has been around for a long time. Many of you, I'm sure, may have heard of it. Some of you may not have heard of it. But this effectively was at one point the largest physical country in the world, of over 15 countries making up the USSR. And was the third largest country in the world in terms of the amount of people, behind India and China. And it led as well not only in the fact of being part of the Soviet Union, but it was also around the policies that occurred at the time within that area, very communist policy, and as a result of the communist policy, conditions of how those people should live in those environments, and specifically the anti-West in terms of the Western cultures and society that should not occur within those countries. Now that broke down in the 90s with the famous collapsing of the Berlin Wall and the breakdown of West versus East. But as stated by Putin in 2005, he considers the demise of the Soviet Union one of the greatest geopolitical catastrophes, i.e. that should never have happened. And arguably at the moment is the fact that whether or not that's something which Russia, or specifically Putin, wishes to reinstate. And it's not a coincidence that Ukraine was one of those key countries as part of the USSR. So it's hard to imagine that 2 weeks ago that we could have a European country invading another. We'd have this mass situation we've got with refugees, but that's exactly where we were. And on Thursday, February the 4th, Russia began its invasion. And we see a lot of the news coming out that this is political, a lot of the news coming out that this is around armies, a lot of the news from Russia especially saying this is not about impacting on the local people and impacting on the people of Ukraine. Though, as we've seen in imagery and we've got on the screen now in terms of a housing, a block, but more importantly in this video, there's certainly a huge, massive impact on the lives of people within the Ukraine.
Russian shelling might break Ukraine's will to fight, but not yet. They had to keep moving. Until the last minute, these families had hung on. Leaving your home, even in a war, is a giant step. They're heading towards the capital, still almost untouched, but only about 10 miles away. She was as dignified as a woman striding to the park. In fact, like all of Ukraine and Russia, they are struggling into a dark future. Ukrainian troops were moving back into Irpin, and this is why its people left. Journalists tried to help the casualties. A family, mother, father, and 2 children were killed by another shell. This was inside the town, Russia's target as it tries to revive its offensive. The civilians are getting out over what's left of a bridge that was blown to slow down the Russians if they take Irpin. Civilians are supposed to be protected by the laws of war. Russian shells were very close. Good luck, huh? Stopping was not an option. I'm okay, she said. Keep going. A disabled man couldn't make it up the steep riverbank on his own.
There's a fair amount of incoming fire coming into this now. Artillery fire. There are loads of civilians around. Families coming out. There's a lady there with her dog following on. This is the edge of the town that the Russians have got to.
Civilians were in the firing line, but the Russians might have been trying to knock out nearby active Ukrainian artillery. Casualties and evacuees were taken to an assembly point in a suburb about a mile away.
The footage that we've seen is clearly shocking, and it's really hard to get our heads around that this is happening obviously in Europe. And as we saw from the videos, not only have we seen significant deaths of civilians, but we've now got the largest growing refugee crisis since the Second World War.
Refugees from Ukraine crossing the Danube into Romania. The numbers arriving across the continent fast approaching 2 million people, and throwing into stark focus the response of different European countries to this crisis. Oksana and her children have just got out. They're from Poltava, west of Kharkiv, about to board a bus on the Hungarian border bound for Budapest. A refugee, yes. A victim, no.
We don't lose this war.
You're going to win.
Yes, we're going to win.
Why are you so sure about that?
Because we have truth on our side.
Because you have truth on your side.
Yes, yes, because truth is on our side. Because it's our earth and it's our homes and it's our lives.
Oksana is in the tiny village of Berak-Shuran near the Hungarian border with Ukraine. Just one of hundreds of communities across Europe on the front line of the fastest growing refugee crisis since World War II. Is just one village in one country, Hungary. Poland is taking the lion's share.
By the end of this week, it's likely that Poland will have taken in 1.5 million refugees as a result of the war in Ukraine. To put that in perspective, in 2015, at the height of the refugee crisis, all EU states together took in about the same number, 1.5 million refugees. Hungary, where we are, has taken in about 180,000 so far. Now, the circumstances are different, but compare that to what the UK is taking so far.
Yesterday, the Home Office announced that the government had issued just 50 visas to Ukrainians with family links to Britain, about the same number of people getting on one of the fleet of buses in this village. Today, Boris Johnson questioned the figure of just 50 and said that thousands of applications were being processed.
I'm not sure those numbers are right, but we're processing thousands as I speak to you. And clearly this crisis is evolving the whole time. And I've said before that the UK will be as generous as we can possibly be.
Comparing
So what can we do about it? There's an obvious question. Why are we not attacking Russia back? There's a question being asked from Ukraine. Why are we not defending the airspace above it to prevent missiles and prevent planes coming in and attacking people in Ukraine? The challenge around it clearly is very complicated, and specifically is around the fact that if it engages further, there's a chance, obviously, clearly, of escalation. And the concern from Russia or for Russia is using nuclear weapons, which exist in the Russian state, along with USA and UK. And you'll hear talk about the Cold War back in the 1950s and 1960s, where we had that real concern around the escalation of nuclear war between those two power countries of the USA and Russia. So the question is, can the world change conflict via other means? And what we're seeing over the last 2 weeks and even into today now has been companies and countries around the world saying this is what we're going to do, from banning of Russian oil said today by UK and USA, Shell saying they're no longer going to be taking Russian oil, Germany cancelling the pipeline of oil, airlines saying they're no longer flying to Russia, and in many ways cutting Russia off from the entire world. Netflix, China, Google, Apple, you can see from the logos, many countries saying we will not operate within Russia. And it might be questioned, well, what's that going to do about it? But I suppose it comes back down to thinking around in a moment about democracy versus dictatorship, and whether or not that impact on the people ultimately may have an impact on the dictatorship within the country. But you see, McDonald's there have now today, and after a lot of pressure, in fairness, on Tuesday to remove themselves from the country or close down their stores, have yesterday agreed to do that. And again, it might seem, well, big deal, we're not going to sell hamburgers in Russia, but in reality the opening of a McDonald's in Russia was absolutely huge on the back of the Berlin Wall going down. It was seen as one of the most significant milestones of Western culture moving into a communist USSR at the time. So the fact that it stops today, or it stops yesterday in terms of Tuesday, has a massive significant context in terms of potentially and sadly a reflection of maybe decline in where we've been since that point in 1990 and 1991. So we come to this point around democracy versus dictatorship. Has things changed in the country? And arguably we've now moved, or Russia, which was previously meant to be a democracy, arguably, though Putin has been in power for over 20 years, compared now to a dictatorship where we see a form of government in which one person or a small group possesses that absolute power. And there's no doubt that's clearly in the state now, and we've seen within the country, and more importantly, it's important, and sadly we've seen anti-Russian impact around the UK, and it's really important to understand that we've got a considerable amount of people both across the world, and Russian people across the world, but also in Russia itself, who are protesting against this, who are saying this is not right, and are arguing the democracy to say it is not right and it is not fair. And they are the people themselves which are now being impacted, as we've seen and as we've discussed, by these sanctions that are coming in from across the world against Russia. And though we've seen that, we're even seeing the dictatorship against those people, with arrests being made and laws being put in place to prevent people within Russia from protesting against it. A key example there, also shown in the photographs here, are around the news reporters who were presenting what was going on and accurately probably portraying the atrocities that were occurring in Ukraine. They've been shut down, and themselves, when they were banned, and there now is a media ban within a dictatorship media ban within Russia, preventing anyone speaking out against what is being said from the Kremlin and what is being said by Russia and by Vladimir Putin. As a result of that, they actually walked out in the early part of this week in protest. So we've got this conflict now against democracy versus dictatorship, and it's something you're going to be talking about in your LRGs over today and the rest of this week as we look at what's going on within Ukraine. One of the significant things that happened yesterday was the presentation from President Zelensky in the Parliament in the UK. The first time a president's ever done that by virtual link into Parliament.
To remind you the words that the United Kingdom have already heard, and which are important again. We will not give up, and we will not lose. We will fight till the end, at sea, in the air. We will continue fighting for our land, whatever the cost. We will fight in the forests, in the fields, on the shores, in the streets. I would like to add that we will fight on the banks of different rivers like Dnieper, and we are looking for your help, for the help of the civilized countries. We are thankful for this help, and I'm very grateful to you, Boris. Please increase the pressure of sanctions against this country, and please recognize this country as a terrorist state. And please make sure that our Ukrainian skies are safe. Please make sure that you do what needs to be done and what is stipulated by the greatness of your country. Best of all to Ukraine and to the United Kingdom.
So what can we do about it? One of the significant impacts, not only of the 2 million refugees, is the impact on children. And this was an article today in the BBC around a 11-year-old boy who himself, because his mum was unable to leave because her mum was trapped in Ukraine and couldn't leave. As a result of that, she had to get her boy to safety, and she literally put him onto a train, said goodbye to him, and that boy, through himself, through travel on train and through walking, travelled 750 miles across Ukraine to reach Slovakia and safety at that time. You know, that boy, only 4 4 years below many of you is an incredible journey, but also a harrowing tale and recognition of the impact of children from the crisis. And that's why as AUEA, as well as our continued fundraising in many other areas, have dedicated the time both from our awareness day that we're doing today on Wednesday, but over the next couple of weeks is to continue to look at ways of raising money towards UNICEF and their support of children in Ukraine. So not only are you supporting today by wearing some yellow or wearing some blue, getting involved with other activities is vital, and therefore as part of the rest of this LRG today, there's some activities I'd like you to do and discuss, and then I'd like you to also be thinking around some other fundraising activities that we can do as a school to help support this crisis and help the children in Ukraine. So some of the questions I'm leaving you with today to talk about is, civilians should never be targeted? Do you agree or disagree? And you can make your vote. And then I want you to articulate, which I know you can do, so very eloquently, what your points are, why. And then also, does it matter where conflict occurs in the world? Is it more important that, or more of a concern, that the conflict is happening in Europe, that's happening in Ukraine? Does that matter more than the conflict in Gaza? Does that happen more than the conflict in the Congo and the conflicts happening in Sierra Leone and other places all around the world? There's something else I'd like you to discuss, agree and disagree, and what are your views on that? It's important we talk about these matters. It's important that we vocalise our concerns, and it's absolutely important. I'm very proud that we as AUEA stand up and say this is not right, and we do what we can to fundraise, no matter what that charity is, whether that's anywhere in the world or whether that's at home, and how we do that. It's important to discuss the fact that if you've got any issues from this assembly, been affected by the ongoing conflict, it is absolutely okay to feel worried about it. It is absolutely okay to be concerned about what's going on. And the most important thing that you can do is talk to somebody. Talk to your parents, talk to your LRG tutor, talk to your teachers, talk to your friends, and more importantly as well, most importantly, talk to our amazing pastoral team who are there to help and support you through this time. So please make yourself known to us, and we're ready to help and support you. Thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for your support in this matter.